Woodworking on a piece of insulation laid across some sawhorses was supposed to be a temporary workbench solution. 2 years later, it's finally time for an upgrade. I need a permanent outfeed table and solid assembly workbench, and I want them to be a matched set. And I'm going to use as much leftover lumber as I can to build it. Let's do this. Step 1. Mill these awful and dirty 2x down to a usable squareness. Jointer, then planer. My apologies to the blades. Next, I waxed the clamps to keep the glue from sticking and laminated the 2x into leg blanks. Doing them all in one clamping setup is much faster and easier, as long as you don't accidentally smear glue between the wrong boards. Once the leg blanks were dry, I squared them up. Ideally, these would have been 3 pieces each to cut them down to perfect squares, but I didn't have that much lumber. When you're working with scraps, sometimes you need to be flexible with the design, so rectangles it is. Before finishing the legs, I built the tops. This was crucial because I needed their exact finished thickness. I wanted the outfeed table to sit just lower than my table saw, so hitting my mark within 1/8 was mandatory. Each bench top is made of 3 pieces. 2 3/4 birch plywood panels laminated together with a thin piece of 1/4 inch laid on top. To laminate the 2 plies, I smeared on a lot of glue and then weighed them down with cans of paint. Gravity is nature's original clamp, right? When the panels were dry, I flush trimmed the edges with a router. Now that I'm watching this back, I realized there was absolutely no reason to do this. I could have just squared them up with the track saw and flushed everything at the same time. Hindsight is even more annoying when you video every single step of your project. Then, I cut the EcoBoard 1/4 inch top to the same size. I want this layer to be removable so that I can swap it out as it gets damaged, so I held it down with double-sided tape. I'll add a feature later that will help it stay in place better than the tape alone. With the bench tops finished, I could finally cut the legs to final length, sand them, and then chamfer the edges and bottoms at the router table. Then I cut some more leftover lumber for all of the stretchers. I used 2x4s for the smaller outfeed table and the bottom row of the assembly table, but I grabbed some leftover 5/4 trim for the upper stretchers of the assembly table. This deeper stretcher leaves more room for Doghole accessories. I also cut access holes into 2 of these top stretchers so I can get into the Doghole box for cleaning and for temporary storage. No fancy joinery for shop projects that I want done quickly, so I pocket hold everything. That makes the assembly a little bit annoying, but with the right clamps, patience, and a little luck, I got it done without too much trouble. I also added some corner braces to each bench to add rigidity. I don't want these wiggling around while I'm trying to make a perfectly straight cut on the top. Securing the tops was easier than I thought. I tried flipping the legs onto the top and lifting the top onto the legs. Flipping is much easier than lifting. Because the tops are plywood and won't expand with moisture changes, I screwed them right to the legs. That should be fine. And no, that's not foreshadowing. It really has been fine. From here, I cut maple strips to 1.5 inches wide and screwed them all along the edges of the bench tops. Screwing them lets me remove them later. These lock the thin top piece into place and hide the ugly plywood edges. That way, when I remove them, I can pull up that top sheet and swap it out for a new one. Once the edging was done, I marked out a grid of dogholes spaced 6 inches apart. Why did I use a piece of scrap wood instead of my 4-foot level here? I have no idea. Then I used my unopened Miles Craft portable drill press to drill all of the holes. This press is a bit flimsier than I had expected, but it did the job just fine. An augering bit is way more efficient than a Forstner bit, but of course I can't find the footage of actually using it, so here's a bad recreation. When I was happy with the number of holes, I went through and gave them all a small chamfer to make it easier to slip accessories in and out.
That's what she said.
For the hell of it, I applied Danish oil to all the raw wood parts. Nothing wrong with looking good in the workshop, right? Then I applied 3 coats of paste wax onto the working surface to keep the glue from sticking and ensure that the lumber slides smoothly. I absolutely should have installed leveling feet and the wheel plates before flipping these tables over, but I didn't. That meant crawling around on my very creaky knees on the very hard concrete floors, until I remembered that I could just flip them all back over, and then it was easier. It took some time to get the tables leveled how I wanted because my floors are sloped, but I got there. Then I cut another 1/4 inch sheet of plywood to screw to the bottom of the assembly table, creating a kind of dog hole box to catch all the sawdust. Again, something I should have done with the table flipped over, but crawling around under there was kind of fun, until the next day at least. I also cut a piece of plywood to make a shelf for the bottom of the outfeed table and screwed that down. Only a little crawling needed for that one. The last step for the outfeed table was cutting extensions for the table saw miter slots so I can push jigs all the way through the blade. My palm router with a taped down plywood template made quick work of these, though I should have done this before I waxed the tabletops. At this point, the benches were completely usable, and there are a ton of options for storage beneath. You could do drawers or shelves, or, well, some version of drawers or shelves are really the only 2 options you have. I went with drawers on the main working side of the assembly table. I made these modular units, so if I ever want to rearrange the storage, I can. Again, I used up some scrap plywood for this, 3/4 paint grade birch for pretty much everything. Drawers are straightforward, just do everything you can to get consistent square parts. This is the first project that I used a track square for my track saw, and oh my god, what a difference over using a non-attached square. So much faster and more accurate. I'm really starting to love using my track saw more with every project I do. The cabinet boxes were easy to assemble, right angle clamps, parallel clamps, glue, and some screws. Take the time to really square them up and clamp across the diagonals to confirm that they match. Then the drawers themselves. The only thing I did differently than normal was using 1/2 inch plywood for several of the bottoms just for strength, so I rabbited the edges to fit the same grooves as the 1/4 inch panels. I've built dozens of drawers at this point, enough that I got cocky and did the bottom math wrong. I made the mistake of making the bottoms too wide. I basically measured everything as if all 4 box edges were going to be on the outside of the other one, which is a very MC Escher impossible way to build boxes. On these boxes, it's not a big deal, very, very easy fix. I'll just trim this down to the appropriate size. It's gonna be a little bit harder on these, which I rabbited a 1/2 inch plywood instead of just using 1/4 inch plywood because I wanted stronger drawers because this is gonna hold more tools and things like that. So I'm going to have to recut these boards and then re-rabbit the edges. I'm gonna stop for a bit and go grab some lunch because I'm frustrated with myself, and woodworking while you're frustrated is not super safe. Oh well, such is life. So, oops. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we always take the time to dry fit. Easy enough to fix, and assembly was as easy as it should have been the first time. Side mount drawer slides are cheap and easy to install if you use a spacer block instead of trying to read a tape measure inside the cabinet box. With the drawers installed, I cut one more piece of leftover plywood to the exact size of the entire opening and then cut that piece down to individual drawer faces. The 1/8 kerf of the blade means that if you do everything right, you'll get perfect 1/8 inch spacing. Then the Craig cabinet hardware jig made quick work of the holes for the drawer holes. Some playing cards spaced everything out perfectly, and a few screws later, everything was done and ready to load up. I'm stopping the project here, even though there are still some storage spaces that need to be finished. The thing is, I don't know exactly what I want to store there yet, so I'm going to use the bench for a few months and decide what will be most useful for my workflow. But even without these last few storage sections, this outfeed and assembly table combination are an instant improvement to my workflow. Everything is stable, I've got lots of clamping surfaces, and I'm not worried that my insulation tabletop is going to crack in half while I'm halfway through a cut. This shop furniture is built to be abused, rebuilt, and reorganized as my workflow changes. It's a permanent solution built with a temporary mindset, and that's what makes it perfect. Plus, it looks a lot better on camera, and after all, isn't that the most important thing?